Okay, welcome back. We're on page 242 or so, talking about how we really have an obligation to try to level out the employee's expectation of what this ethical perception is, because you might have trouble, depending on where they grew up, of explaining to them, no, this is not legit. So how do you deter unethical behavior? It's basically three causes. Ignorance. Like, yeah, I didn't know. By the way, you've heard this term before. Ignorance of the law is no excuse. Well, yeah, that might be true, except for policies. Remember we talked about policies where you had to have them disseminated, understood, and agreed to. So if you were completely unaware that there was a policy that prohibited this whatever action, well then that's not. I mean, that is an excuse. Ignorance of the law is an excuse in this case, because those 5 requirements. Okay, so ignorance, I didn't know. Accident, I didn't mean to. Those pesky humans could accidentally do something stupid. I didn't mean to send that document to everybody. Like, oh man, you sent the senior compensation plan, to everybody. Wow. And then the third one would be intent. I did something unethical and I intended to do it. It was a crime. So let's talk about something that's kind of context sensitive here. All right. If I was to put a paperweight on my office and someone went, ooh, that is a really nice paperweight. Nobody's looking. I think I'll just take that paperweight. Most people would have an ethical conscience to say, that's not legit. And that typically theft of, your own personal equipment sitting on your own desk in an office environment is pretty low. But your lunch sack in the refrigerator, for some reason, people just have this on-off switch with ethics. I won't steal his paperweight, but I'll steal his lunch. Like, what? How in the world can you say that? How can you say stealing his paperweight is bad, but stealing his lunch is not? That's just insane. Anyway. So the context sensitive thing is kind of sort of important. Okay, so what are the deterrents? Well, the deterrents obviously have to do with, there's a penalty for parking where you're not supposed to. Apprehension, that kind of thing. So a fear of penalty, that might deter some people. The probability of getting caught, like put a camera in the break room, find out who's stealing the lunches. And the probability of a penalty being applied. So, yeah, if you steal somebody's lunches, I'm sorry, we're going to have to let you go. That's a fireable offense. So that might deter people from stealing lunches. Okay. So what about when applied a boss for subordinate actions? In other words, could I say, I'm going to withhold a bonus from you, Mr. Manager, because one of your employees did some unethical things that I'm going to use stealing lunches. Would that hold up? Could you hold a supervisor accountable for the unethical operations of the employees? I don't know. Probably not. That's a little tough. But SETA, remember the security education training and awareness thing? That's all about this. That promotes, all 3 of it. Tells them about no longer you can say this is ignorant. No, and you can't have accidents, and certainly no intent. So code of ethics for professional organizations. There are major organizations out there that basically have this thing. The Association of Computer Machinery, one of the oldest, ACM, has been around for quite some time. The International Information Systems Security Certification Consortium, ISC squared. That's basically the gold standard for certifications. Okay, if you got one of their certifications, yeah, that's pretty doggone good. SANS, which is typical, it used to be an acronym, but it's not anymore. Mostly in Europe. The ISACA, accounting control. Information Systems Association, ISA. The European Union Council, the Certified Ethical Hacker, those kind of things, and certified, certification exams and all those kinds of things. So one of the things that's weird is, let's say this sounds a little silly, but one of the things that ACM says, you can't hack somebody's material. And if we catch you hacking or we find out that you're hacking, we're going to revoke your membership. Like, whoopee, right? So, the deterrent here is you get kicked out of the organization. Now, if you're a certified ethical hacker and you're a white hat and you're trying to hang your shingle and say, hey, hire me to come, attempt to break in your system, and I promise I'll be good, and you have an ethical mark against the organization that does that, yeah, you're probably going to have to go out of business. So, key federal agencies, page 249. Department of Homeland Security, right? So they combine with, domestic security agencies, right? If you remember all that stuff, they used to be separate, the CIA and the FBI and all that stuff, they all were separate. And then the U.S. CERT, which is the U.S. Computer Emergency Readiness Team. And so we use those guys to track attacks as they occur, exploits, incidences, all that stuff. And there's a catalog for these things, a catalog of vulnerabilities, all right? And so this is the CVE. Now, so what I did is I basically just did a search on Microsoft to pull up these CVE numbers. And so this basically talks about, here's a CVE for interoperability suite for Microsoft Azure. Prior to this, some sort of attack daemon running as root, writes roast cage fired, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so this is how you go in and you tell people that there's a problem, and it gets tracked, and you kept track of it. When Microsoft produces a patch, they usually reference these things to say, yes, it's like a check mark. We found out we had a problem. Thank you. We fixed it with this version and put a check mark next to it saying resolved. Okay. So it's kind of, you might consider getting on their mailing list. I mean, I did it for a while, and it was kind of a low volume topic for a while, and then I started getting just floods of this stuff, and so I kind of backed off the things that were on the mailing list. But yeah, getting their bulletins. Don't wait for the news to pop it up. And by the way, the YouTube channels and news, they tend to dramatize things. Oh, the world is going to come to an end because of this. It's like, yeah. And you read the CVE, and it says, well, you have to be standing on your head, and you have to be left-handed, and you have to be in this particular, state to be able to, come on, this is not happening. So Secret Service, well, they basically do counterfeit stuff, right? In addition to, protecting the president. So they're the ones that do the safeguard of financial infrastructure, like Wall Street kind of thing. And, currency meaning, dollars and coins and stuff, to electronic transmissions of those things. Obviously, the FBI, that makes sense. That's the federal law enforcement. And the U.S. Attorney's Office is the one who points them in the right direction. There's a National InfraGard program. This is kind of cool. I'm not sure this is still in existence, but what they would do is it would allow the FBI to go down to some state organization or local organization and say, let me show you some of the tools that we're using to combat this type of theft. And so they allow them to exchange back and forth, and you could be like a state trooper, and you could be assigned to the FBI for a period of time to learn their techniques. Pretty cool. It's all about a free exchange of information between the parties, to make sure that, if somebody's on the radar here, then they ought to be on the radar here as well. And then the National Security Agency, NSA, is the one who basically handles the cryptology standards. Now, I'll confess, the national cryptology standards is basically what everyone is using. In other words, no one goes out and develops their own. So if the NSA says, hey, we're going to use, RSI, and we're going to use, this and this and this for an encryption standard, most everyone else says, well, thank God, because we don't have to deal with it. We'll just adopt their standard and move on. So, other countries can basically just wait for us to come up with a good encryption standard, and they'll just follow. Okay? Okay, we've reached the end of this chapter, and I'll see you guys again in the next chapter.